Hello, hello. Am I audible? Can someone uh, drop? Okay, seems like it's working. Perfect. Sorry, I'm just doing a live stream after years, so just testing it out. Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first sort of edition of Founders Hours. Right. The idea is very simple here. With this session at Public Policy India, where we we ask our community members right across India to share whatever questions that they might have right from across the policy space, right, be it policy making, governance, careers, etc. Right, and we sort of collect much of those questions in advance, right, and I sort of try and answer these, and of course then as we sort of build this out and as a regular practice, we'll have more and more people join online live as well, right? So I'll quickly introduce myself. My name is Yash Agrawal. I'm the founder of Public Policy India and Stride, which is PPI's think tank, right? And I worked in the policy space for, I mean, more than 8 years now, full time, and practically more than a decade if you include all the internships, fellowships, and what have you, right? I started my career in the parliament as a LAM fellow. Started and PPI started 6 years ago. We'll complete 6 years this 15th of August, right? And have mostly built a career full time in tech. Wants to enter the policy area. What skills does one need to learn? Shrikant, I'll put it this way, right? That like any other field, is this about the credentials that you have? What is the mix of credentials that you have or that you're working with, right? So and the good news is that the credentials are of two kind, right? There's work credentials and then there's education credentials. So if anyone thinking that how to build a career in any field, right, the idea is simply that first you try and figure out that what the credentials that are relevant to the field are, right? So if you take, I mean, let's just take policy an example, right? So again, work credentials are what you can do: a full-time job, you can intern somewhere, you can volunteer somewhere, you can have a part-time job, you can have a fellowship, etc., etc. Right? That's work credentials, right? And the all of these are different kinds of credentials, but on the work experience side of things, right? And then there's education credentials, which is what you can have a full-time degree. Sorry, I mean, you can have an undergrad degree, you can have a master's degree, you can have a certificate course, you can have a diploma, etc., etc. Right? So again, the good news is there's only two kind of credentials: work credentials and education credentials, right? And on the basis of that, right, it just depends on what do you build out of it, right? So if you're thinking of, again, how do I get into policy, there's a chance that you have an undergrad degree, not in public policy, maybe pol science, econ, history, what have you, right? Mass communication, journalism, right? So then your goal should be that, hey, how can I build work credentials for myself? It can be you can intern somewhere, volunteer somewhere. There are a lot of fellowships, by the way, which are for mostly aimed at freshers, right? And they don't pay very well, but whatever, it's sort of a subsistence wage, right? You consider check those out. Those are mostly designed for freshers, right? The other bit I would also add, and given you've also asked about how does someone from tier 2 college get into it, I'll be very honest. I didn't go to some very fancy globally recognized institution, right? I mean, Symbiosis Pune, which is a very good private college, no doubt, right, in Pune. But still, it's not, it's not something that has a lot of relevance to do with the policy space or recognition here, right? Um, I just did exactly what I've been sort of preaching, right, which is even while I was in college, in undergrad, right, pursuing my journalism between 2016 and 2019, I just did a lot of internships. I would be working all the time actually, right? In 3 years, I did some 7, 8 internships and more actually in terms of projects and so on and so forth, right? Most of these were opportunities that I created for myself, right? And that is what I cannot emphasize on enough. That's something that you have to do for yourself, right? Just build out that set of opportunities. We are generally past that era and the time of when there'll be someone who'll just sort of come to you, or there'll be a linear path that, hey, if you do this, you'll get this job, this salary, this career progression, these many years. That's not going to happen. Like, this is done for, right? So yeah, that's the first question. The next one is from Harshit. He's asking, I want to break into public policy job roles. How should I stack my skills and develop my personality for work? So Harshit, I just covered in terms of how to get into this space just now, right? But in terms of the personality bit, and honestly, it's not about personality, right? It's in the sense I'll cover it from the POV of this is a skill set in general, right? Here's what I would say, right? That public policy is purely a people's business. Okay, usually we are not doing something extra technical or something very high level or what have you, right? I mean, of course, the technical parts of policy making, without a doubt, right? It's a science, right? And very important one at that, right? Very very serious one at that, right? It's a vocation, profession, what have you, right? And there are elements of technicalities, monitoring, evaluation, all of that involved, without a doubt. At the same time, for a major chunk of policy roles, right? the softer skills, the human skills are the ones that count the most, right? Most of the other things it's stuff you can learn on the job, right? So I often joke when I'm teaching at universities and schools that most hiring these days is vibe hiring, right? Which means that the organization these days are increasingly evaluating a candidate, especially during the interview stage, right? If you'll be a good cultural fit or not, if you're technical fit or not, that sort of gets assessed at the assignment stage itself, right? So interviews especially are mostly about, and the final decision, of course, right? It's mostly about figuring out if you're cultural fit or not, right? So that's what I would say to anyone who's sort of also aspiring to build a career here, which is, even if you consider yourself to be an introvert, right, or someone who has social anxiety, or maybe not the best with people skills, right? That's all right, but do try and sort of figure out what are the pockets in which you can meet people, interact with them, learn from them. Because the other thing is, in public policy, right, in this broader space, most knowledge is with individuals, not so much with institutions, right? And so knowledge transfer mostly happens when you interact with other individuals, right? So that's broadly what I would say in terms of getting into policy and the skill set. I mean, the other skill set, of course, is depending on the kind of policy job that you're doing, right? Your skills will differ. It's a long conversation, but how there's 5 pillars of policy making: ideation, design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation, right? And in each of the 5 pillars, right, depending on which pillar you're working at, determines how much you get paid, what work-life balance do you have, what organization can you work with, etc. Right? Like the whole thing is, I mean, at least to my sort of understanding, what I've seen in the last 10 years, right, that it depends on which pillar of policy making are you working at, right? So in the ideation and design pillar of policymaking, right, it's mostly about think tanks, universities, academia, right, sort of coming together and figuring out, again, ideating on public problems, how do you solve them, etc. Right? So that needs a different kind of skills, more research heavy, analysis, writing, right? If you're working as policy implementation, right, that is essentially you want to work in the impact sector, social sector, non-profits, CSO, so on and so forth, right? That is a different set of skills, because you're working at the grassroots sometimes, right? And again, if you are, say, working monitoring evaluation, that's a more technical part of policy, that needs different skill sets again, and again has different organizations working there, right? So I hope that makes sense, right? We can get into much depth for this, but broadly, right? Okay, Devi is asking, how do I break into policy social sector jobs when most listings ask for prior experience? Great question, Devi, right? And a very common question, right? Here's how I would put it, right? That if you want to, okay, let me approach it differently, right? If a job, and I know I'm saying this in public, but if a job listing wants, say, 1 to 2 years of experience, right? And if you have no full-time work experience, please apply, right? In a lot of cases, that's just a filter that organizations sort of put, right? Please don't rule yourself out. It's someone else's job to rule you out. If I apply somewhere and I'm not fit for the job, they'll rule me out. That's fine. Why should I rule myself out, right? Of course, that does not mean that we do spam applications, no, right? But what I'm trying to say is that there's a margin of, if like a year or two here or there, that's fine. You should definitely consider applying, right? There's also a level of nuance here for a lot of us, and I can see some questions coming in. I'll definitely sort of try and take them up, right? Thank you for joining again, right? But the point being that some organizations do consider internship to be a part of full-time work experience. Same goes for fellowships as well, right? So that's different between how different organizations perceive your full-time work experience to be. Again, the simple answer is please apply, right? So come back to the question. The viewer was asking that how do I get into policy jobs or social impact sector jobs when I don't have work experience and they ask for work experience. So that's one thing. The other is, and I keep saying this all the time, which is please apply for fellowships. Most fellowships are designed literally for freshers, people early to the field, right? So just take that up, do consider that, right? And while they don't pay the most, they're decent, right? I mean, okay, less than decent the pay, but the experience is fairly good, right? In most well-known fellowships, right? So that's a very solid way to get into public policy without any experience, right? And the final thing is, and you'll see me repeating this across the conversation today, which is internships are your best friend. The more that you can intern, whatever experience you can get, whichever place you can get it, right, it'll help you like nothing else, more than a degree also, right? And again, if you can't intern, for example, you're not getting a response, maybe you can volunteer somewhere, with your local NGO non-profit. That's also fine, right? And they're always very happy to sort of get your inputs or your support, if you volunteer with your time, right? I can see, okay, Nandini is asking, actually before that, let me take a question from the comments, right? Someone is asking, are you reading? Is this pre-recorded? I'm sorry, I'm unable to get your name, Khadyot G7550. But I am reading, so I have a set of questions that the community has submitted in advance. So I'm just answering those questions. And I think this will be on a YouTube page nonetheless, permanently. So that's there, right? Okay, Kumar Aditya is asking, do you want to do a business startup but don't know what to do, capital constraints? Um, Kumar, I'm sorry, but this is not relevant, for the policy space. I won't be taking it up. But what in general I can say is that for anyone who wants to become an entrepreneur, right? I'm an entrepreneur myself, and especially in the policy impact sector, right? Please just figure out what is the white space. What is the gap? What is a problem that exists that no one else has solved for, right? If you can solve that for society, society will find a way to reward you and pay you. That's what I would say, right? Okay, the next question, Devi is asking. We have answered Devi's question. Someone is asking. Yes, Shweta. Shweta is asking, as someone who wants to start their own product organization to increase conversations or discussions on policy and governance, how do you collaborate with NGOs? Shweta, great question, right? And there's something, we at PPI, and since we recently launched Stride, our think tank, right, we also sort of working with, right? See, again, the one thing is that, you just have to figure out what the gap is. What is the problem that you're trying to solve, right? I keep saying this to my team all the time, which is, what is the reason for us to exist, right? If we are just duplicating what something someone else is doing already, there's no point. It's not worth our time, right? So please figure out that one white space, right, and just solve that. Just go for that, right? Sometimes I tell people that I hate competition because I want to work on things that no one else is working on. That's all, right? There are so many organizations in the broader public policy impact sector that do just one thing and they do it really well, right? That'll be my request to you as well, right? On the second part of your question, Shweta, how do you partner with NGOs and CSRs? Being very honest, if you're of a certain scale, or even if your organization has a certain sense of relevance, they will reach out, right? And even if they do not, if you reach out, they'll reply, right? There's just such a flood of different institutions and organizations in this space these days, right? That there's a lot of clutter as well, right? So you need to have your messaging and value proposition very clear, why someone should engage with you, collaborate with, etc. Right? So I hope that sort of answers your question. Shiat is asking, I'm a political consultant looking for opportunity in public policy, right? Okay, fine. Shiat is essentially asking that, for someone who wants to work in political consulting, right, or policy consulting as well, right? How do you do that? Get into that. I'll answer this differently, which is by sort of taking up the question of, firstly, what is consulting? Here's how I look at it, right? What I've seen the last 10 years. The consulting is essentially the exercise of hiring for talent or skills that you can't or don't want to have on your own payroll. So sometimes, very silly example, but let's just say if I'm talking, if I'm sort of having a conversation with a student who wants to go abroad on, what that landscape looks like for half an hour, I'm in a sense consulting with him or her, on education opportunities or what have you, right? Very silly example, but if you sort of scale that up, consulting is essentially that, hiring for skill sets and expertise that you can't or don't want to have on your payroll or permanently, right? So that's how, sort of, even if you look at political and policy consulting space in India, I would say most of the jobs in this space right now, right? Okay, not a majority, right? But a very large chunk are in these two spaces, right? Policy consulting in India is booming. There are many, many reasons, right? And not all of them are good reasons, but, solid reasons nonetheless. There's some judicial stay at certain levels of hiring. There's a lot of, there's government hiring is very complex, right? A lot of things are under litigation, right? And also politicians make promises during every election that they have to keep, right? Even if keep up with parts of it, right? So they need people. The state needs people. The government needs people at different levels, to implement those policy promises and those changes, right? But where do you get those people from? Since you can't hire them as the government on your own payroll, you sort of hire them indirectly, right, through the consulting firms, right? You'll notice a lot of people working for KPMG, Deloitte, PwC, etc. They actually sit within the ministries. They are seconded, right, and especially at the state level, actually, right? So that's what the model looks like and how it works, right? And for people who wanted to work in this space, all I can say is that all kinds of skill sets are needed because most consulting firms do everything from A to Z. So if you have data skills, communications, partnerships, liaisoning, what have you, all your skills are valuable. You just have to figure out the right role for yourself, right? Okay, Praveen is asking, hi Yash, I'm 32-year-old. I have a master's in economics. For the past 10 years, I've worked mostly as a freelancer. How do I start my career, right? Praveen, here's what I would say, and this is something, that I usually don't advise to most people very early in their career, but for someone in your stage of life, with say 5-7 odd years of experience, anyone on the wrong side of 20s, or even the 30s, right? It's not that bad an idea to get a proper public policy education, especially a master's. Again, mostly I get to speak with people who are like 20 years old, 21 or something, and I'm like, don't do a master's right now. work for a few years, get a sense of what the space is, how it works, etc. Right? But for people slightly later on in their life, right, careers or making a transition into policy, a master is always a very good option. Right? It's almost like a clean slate. You get academic credentials, you get the time to generally understand the field. A master's degree, anyways, comes with its own internship, whatever, this thing, dissertation, etc. Right? And that always helps in this field. Right? So that's what I would say. Yuvika is asking, hi, I'm a recent Pol Science graduate. I'm about to take a drop year to do my master's. I want to gain skills and build my resume. Any skills that you would recommend? Yuvika, here's what I would say. Great question, right? The funny thing is that today we have sort of come to an era where learning is abundant and free, right? It's just about what you want out of it and build out of it, right? So again, if someone were to ask me what is the most critical skill of today, I have a very easy answer, which is being AI fluent, AI fluency, right? If you can sort of learn how to utilize these tools and get them to work for you, right, and do that in a very sort of straightforward and measured manner, nothing like it, right? No one can stop you, right? All of the skills. So that's number one. Number two is definitely people skills, right? Human skills, soft skills, communication, negotiation, time management, whatever, right? These two skills, I would say, are easily the most important things of today. Like I can tell you that, at PPI, I run a very lean team and organization, but the amount of work that we're able to do, right, while everyone's sort of having time for themselves, right, it's just because we have set up so many systems, that take care of all the day-to-day admin sort of a work via AI tools, platforms, agentic AI, etc. Right, and hence, everything else just sort of works very in a streamlined manner, and we can focus on the work that we care about, which is engaging with the community, clients, partners, what have you, right? So that's what sort of I would suggest, that if you have a year, if you have taken a drop year before your master's program, do consider that. Just building out those skills and building different things, projects, dashboards, applying to different places. Even if you see that an organization is doing something and they can do that better, you take it on yourself to do it better and just send them that, hey, here's how I would redo this, right? There's a high chance they would apply, then be like, hey, let's chat, how we can sort of take this up, right? Okay, next person is asking, is an MPP, Master's in Public Policy, worth it, or can you break in the policy sector without one? Depends, right? There's very clear two classes of people on this, right? Again, if you're someone who's below even, I would say 25, 24, 23 or something, right? You don't immediately need masters, right? I would really request you to work for a few years, maybe get a fellowship, intern, volunteer, full-time job, whatever it might be, right? Get a sense of what the field looks like, how that works, right? And then sort of get into it, right? At the same time, if you're someone, slightly senior, mid-senior, so to speak, maybe even with 2 to 3 years of experience, full-time, right? Or if you're transitioning to policy or with more experience, definitely a master's makes sense for you, right? Without a doubt, right? People, at PPI, we work with a lot of public policy colleges and universities directly every year throughout the year. And I can tell you that most of them have almost like 100% placement, right? And very good jobs, right? So, that thing is there. The institutions work, the courses work, right? New ones are also coming up, right? But you'll have to be at the right stage of life to be able to make the most of a master in public policy. That's all, right? Okay, next question is, how do you build a network in the policy space if you don't know anyone in this field? I have a very sort of controversial answer on this, right? Which is, as long as you have something valuable to add to someone, right, your network will be built. Those days of when you will go somewhere, get someone's visiting card, write to them, nothing comes out of it. In 99% of the cases, right? There's always exceptions, of course, right? The only best way to approach this is, is there a way you can add any value to anyone's life, right? And don't be like, hey, I'm a fresher, what value can I add to a CEO's life? I'm sure you can, right? Figure that out, right? As long as you can do that, they'll remember you, they'll reach out, they'll have a conversation. That is networking, So, and of course, if whatever work that you're doing, if you're able to put it out there, I promise you, unknown friends will come and find you to help you out, right? That's just the power of it, right? Next question is, can someone from a non-policy background, engineering, commerce, etc., transition into the space, and how? Absolutely. I mean, I have a background in journalism. I never studied policy. I don't have a master's, just have a BA, right? It's not about me. Most people I know in this field, it's like public policy has a space for everyone, from a chemist to a chartered accountant, right? But at the same time, and increasingly as the challenges that the field is dealing with become more complex, right? And those are policy challenges, right? There's definitely a need for technical people, specialists and all, right? But still the door is wide open, I would say. A lot of the roles just need you to be very AI fluent or human fluent, so to speak. Have the sense of soft skills, and everything else you can learn on the job. I can promise you, right? And especially for mid and entry level jobs, right? Um, Next question is, how can I look for policy jobs that are not in Delhi? Do I need to learn the vernacular language? In fact, this is something we at PBI have been trying to solve for the last 6 years, right? So Public Policy India has chapters in India's 25 largest cities, right? And one of the goals is how do you take policy making outside of New Delhi, right? So that's something PPI has been trying to solve for the last 6 years as well. The 25 chapters that we have across India's 25 largest cities, 40 chapters actually, right? Very vibrant, collective groups of people, individuals, lots of conversations. And of course, we have a newsletter where we share hundreds of new jobs, internships for free every Friday morning. In the city chapters, we share so many of opportunities every single day, every hour of the day, etc. You can all check it out. Everything's for free on the website, publicpolicy.com, right? But that's one thing. But just to answer your question in particular, I would say Mumbai, Bangalore, and New Delhi are the ones where most of the policy jobs are located, right? Delhi obviously has the most, right? Delhi NCR, but Mumbai and Bangalore also pretty solid and stable, right? Especially as compared to what we had 2 years ago, right? And the last question is, any certification or online courses in public policy actually valued by employers? Here's how I would put it: that if you are someone who sort of cares about, let's just say, purely getting a job outside of from that course, right? I hate to break it to you, that will most likely not happen. Okay, it's very easy for me to say that do this and this happen. No, that's not how it works, right? But if you're someone who really loves to learn, or who cares about networking, finding a cohort of people, right, similar to yours, right, who care about policy making and all of that, then definitely consider these courses. I know the Takshashila institution has a great program, right? There are other institutions as well, without a doubt, right? But if you're thinking that I'll do this 2-month course or certificate course, I'll get a job immediately because of it, I would not hold my hopes for that. Right? Okay, I think those were some 15, 20 questions that I received for this editions of the Founder Hours. Any other questions I can see in the chat, in comments? Anything else that you would like me to take up? Anything you would like me to answer? I am very happy to. I think I saw some 2, 3, 4 questions. I've already answered those. Please share your LinkedIn. You can find me, Aditya Kumar. You can find me on LinkedIn. I mean, just Yash Agarwal. You'll find me there. Some Ankita Singh, hi, hello. I don't see any other questions. I will wait for another 5 seconds. And but for everyone who joined, for the first edition of Founders Hour, thank you so much. We'll make this a monthly edition, right? And honestly, I want to do this every fortnight. Okay, so let's just see, how we are sort of how engaged can we see the community to be, and for people to sort of come up, right? But it'll just depend on that. But very happy to sort of do this at least once a month. Please do sign up, share your questions in advance with us, right? What we're trying to sort of do is share as much as possible with our committee members, all open access, and have conversation with you at regular intervals, right? And answer all your questions around careers and policy making. I have shared for a lot of people asking my LinkedIn and other links. I've just shared my website. You'll find everything there, right? And of course, you can find me on the PPI City chapters on it. Goes without saying, right? Thank you again. Have a good weekend and take care. Right. Bye-bye.